further clarify that, I'm open to having that discussion.
The other thing that I'm concerned about here is the UC costs of, well, first of all, I don't understand where the $66 million number comes from. And secondly, the UC costs of $350,000 for bid renegotiation. Will this, I mean, would you consider, or is it in the bill to let the current contracts run out so you do not have to rebid?
I didn't think about that, but that's
I mean,
something we can revisit. Right.
Much more cost effective.
Right. No, I can, let me look at that. I didn't think about that, but something that I'm certainly open to looking at.
Right.
Mr. Chair, may I respond to that question? I just want to clarify the basis for the cost estimate overall. The primary value of the estimate overall is the cost of wages and benefit costs that we would have, and the proponents argued a moment ago that they have not seen any justification for where that figure came from. Again, taking into account that we have over $1 billion of contracting out services going on every year, it's a challenge to get our hands on every single contract within the system. We're working on that now in response to a request by the Senator. We do expect to respond to him on that request very soon. But we sought to take a very conservative estimate of how many folks within that contracted out ranks of contracted out employees would fall into that definition of the bill. We figured that if we are at $1.2 billion a year in contracted value, about 10% of the folks that we bring in would probably have their wages increase as a result of this bill. So 10% is $120 million. We'd recognize that the $120 million contract value for those folks takes into account not only the wages that those vendors pay, but also sometimes supplies and equipment and so forth that's put forward as a result of those contracts, and profit for the vendor. So we looked at what we would be required to pay in excess of what we're currently paying in order to reach, again, that parity level for salary, which we pegged conservatively at about 25%, meaning we would expect to have to pay about 25% more in each and every contract value to allow them to cover the additional costs to achieve parity with UC employees in the bargaining unit, as well as another conservative figure of 30% for benefits, recognizing that in the case of, say, custodial and maintenance and so forth, those folks probably aren't getting benefits currently within their contracted relationships with their vendor. So you take those two into account based on a $120 million basis, 25% more for salary, 30% more for benefits, and that serves as a basis for that $66 million figure. In terms of the administrative costs that the $350,000 you mentioned, those are taking into account the fact that we're no longer allowed to do the renewals and the extensions. So not only would we'd have to engage in more RFPs for the purposes of rebidding those contracts on a more frequent basis, but in addition, the process the bill lays out for how we would go about ensuring that the bidders that submit their RFPs are indeed complying with the requirement that the value of the salary and benefits they're putting forward is accurate, requires a lot of work on the part of the university to, in every instance, at every facility, every campus, every off-site location, to determine locally what those values would be, that there would be additional costs there as well.
Thank you. Oh. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Linder.
Thank you. My question was partially answered by, I guess, when Ms. Irwin had asked the question about which services are going to be covered. One of the things that when he had mentioned that you can't bargain for a performer like Yo-Yo Ma or any I guess concert or something that the university is going to happen. You said you'd be willing to make certain exemptions to. When you're talking about just performance artists and stuff, I think that may be just one of them, but there may be others that might fall into similar categories.
Absolutely, that's not my intent. My intent is to get at the fact that they continue to subcontract these low-wage workers and low-wage jobs, but I don't want to impede a university from being able to compete for world-class talent or for performances or arts exhibits and so forth. So if I need to clarify that further, I would be more than happy to do so.
Okay, I'll certainly take your word for it on that. It's like I said, I'm on the fence. I haven't decided if I'm going to be completely in support of it yet, or if I'll not vote for now and just reserve my decision for later. But thank you.
That's fine.
Ms. Baker.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate you're also going to. It sounds like you're open to some tweaks and potential improvements. Just I'll be a no now based on how the bill is now, and I'll just look forward to seeing what it looks like as it comes out, and appreciate that you're open to working with those who've raised good points.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Some members here brought up some important points, and so I want to make sure we follow up on that.
If I may, I just, I would really affirm that our conversations about this bill with the Senate are that the intent is really to allow the sorts of contracts that allow for Yo-Yo Ma to come and perform should be allowed. And so, we would commit to clarifying that language. The intent really is to go at those contracts for work at the university that is ongoing and that at times, sure, needs a temporary boost in labor, or if there's an element related to it that requires a specificity or an expertise that is not already provided for, is not available in-house, that the university understands that those are the sorts of contracts that they ought to be engaging. Short-term, temporary need. In terms of the cost of needing to rebid contracts, honestly, we're talking about short-term contracts. Temporary is temporary. It is not having a custodian work as a contracted custodian at UCSF for 4 years running, doing exactly the same work as an employee of the university, reporting to the same supervisor and clocking in at the same place. So, hence the new requirement for the university to, on a more frequent basis, rebid.
Senator Lara, would you like to close?
I appreciate the discourse on this item and respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Need a motion? Moved by Mr. Levine, second by Mr. Jones Sawyer. I want to make a comment before we go to the vote. I want to very much agree with my colleague from Santa Barbara. As I served on a K-12 board, as I served on a community college board, I was always of the mindset that internal employees, not only was it beneficial to the worker, but beneficial to the institution, whether it would be bus drivers in a K-12 system, whether those bus drivers did a better job. It is my feeling, and I think that it's borne out, that those drivers, if they work for the district, do a better job and are more invested in the job that they do because they are employees of the district. It was the same feeling that I had when I went to community college board, and I wrote down efficiency when I heard the University of California speak of efficiency. But the same thing, in my mind, applies. As when I was a K-12 school board member, that I would not look for savings at the bottom, that I would not look for savings at the lowest paid level of employees. We've sat here in committee and looked at the top of the salaries, and we have, myself included, defended the top of the pay scale within UC because we want to attract the best possible leadership in UC. But I don't think that we, as legislators, as elected officials, want to defend a savings on the back of the lowest paid workers. And for that reason, I thank the senator for bringing it forward, and it enjoys support. And we have a motion by Mr. Levine, second by Mr. Jones Sawyer. The motion before us is due pass to Assembly accountability. Madam Secretary.
Medina?
Aye.
Medina, aye. Baker?
No.
Baker, no. Bloom? Aye. Bloom, aye. Chavez? Harper?
No.
Harper, no. Irwin? Irwin, aye. Jones Sawyer? Aye. Jones Sawyer, aye. Levine? Levine, aye. Linder? Linder not voting. Lowe? Santiago? Weber? Williams? Aye. Williams, aye.
6-2, Senator, your measure is on call.
Thank you, members. Appreciate it.
Linder, aye.
Linder, aye.
7-2.
7-2.
Measure passes. 7-2, Senator, your measure passes. We'll keep it open for absent members to add on. Item 3, Senator Monty. Excuse me for the mistake at the beginning.
No problem at all. I got my afternoon nap in and I'm ready to go. But thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Proud to present SB 344. In an effort to enhance commercial driver safety and help save lives, Senate Bill 344 requires new drivers seeking a commercial driver's license, or CDL, to complete a training course of instruction from an institution or employer before being issued a commercial license. Specific to this committee, SB 344 removes the Bureau for Private Postsecondary Education exemption for institutions currently offering certified CDL courses, thereby stopping the proliferation of what have been called diploma mills. I became aware of this importance of commercial driver training when I met with the family of 25-year-old Daniel McGuire of Santa Cruz, who was tragically killed in a truck accident in Highway 17 from a driver who lacked adequate training and experience. Unfortunately, this was not an isolated experience. In California, there were 5,327 truck collisions reported in 2012, of which 235 involved fatalities. Hearing the motion in the second, I'll spare you some of this. I'm glad to answer questions. Basically, this legislation, it's won the support of California Trucking Association, California Highway Patrol. This is designed to protect everybody on the road, including truck drivers, and it's designed with this committee's oversight on the Bureau for Private Secondary Education. There's currently an exemption for programs offered under $2,500. That's where we come up with this diploma mill. People online get a certificate for $35, $50. This would remove that exemption, but it would retain the oversight of the Bureau for Private Secondary Education. Be glad to answer any questions members might have.
Any witnesses in support?
No, sir.
Any witnesses in opposition? Questions or comments from the committee? Mr. Harper.
If I can just get a little bit more background or understanding overall on the issue. When reading the bill and reading the synopsis, one of the concerns I initially have is would this be a barrier to entry for people who are looking to get involved in trucking? Do the increased costs, do they provide some sort of barrier to entry that either gives one group an advantage or another group a disadvantage? Because my thinking is that perhaps cost sensitivity may impact this industry. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think one reason we've won the support of the California Trucking Association, this does recognize employer trucking companies that provide their own training. And if they were going to work with DMV to establish standard criteria, and it would accept those employer-provided training programs. It would also recognize those trained in the military. So, for example, veterans who've been trained in the military, that would be accepted by the DMV. It would also recognize people that have been licensed in other states for the time that they drive in California with that other state license. If they seek to get a California commercial driver's license de novo, then they would be required to show that they've entered a training program that meets the DMV criteria. We expect there'll continue to be competition in those schools. We would just rather see the competition be with a baseline of integrity, and I think those that can provide the training at less cost are the ones that are going to make out, but those that are providing training that falls under the DMV standards, we don't want to support that diploma mill as building a false sense of safety among the public or other drivers.
Thank you. I appreciate the context on the issue.
Ms. Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I saw you testify in transportation on this bill. It was very moving testimony, and I saw the Trucking Association very strongly supportive of this bill, and even recall the testimony relayed of the driver who had killed the young man whose parents testified in transportation, saying he wished he'd had better training so he knew how to deal with avoiding the accident. So I just thank you for bringing this forward. I know you've been more. It's been a condensed version of testimony, and just strongly support the bill and appreciate you bringing it forward.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Linder.
Thank you. Echoing the thoughts of the Vice Chair, I was also in the Transportation Committee when it came up, and I was able to have the opportunity to support it then. I will gladly again today, and if I was on 100 committees that this went through, I'd do it 100 times. And I just want to echo what our Vice Chair had mentioned, that there was a very captivating and emotional testimony that went along with this, and how legislation like this would have saved lives, and you can't put a price tag on that. And I'm glad to hear that you've had the support of the industry, and I think that what you have here is a good bill that will continue to save lives. So I'm glad to support it any way I can.
Thank you.
Would you like to close, Senator?
Yeah, just real briefly, and for those that were at the earlier committee hearing, July 11th will mark the one-year anniversary of the death of Daniel McGuire. And as I said in that committee, not every tragedy lends itself to legislation. And when this was brought to me, we looked at it through a caring but skeptical lens. And what we've learned in our work is that this was not an isolated incident. And as Assemblymember Linder just pointed out, this will save lives, and not just on Highway 17 in Santa Cruz, but throughout the state of California. So I appreciate the support that's been voiced here today, and would respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
I also, Senator, was in transportation, and I was very moved, like my colleagues. Motion in front of us, first by Ms. Baker, second by Mr. Bloom. Motion before us, due pass to the Assembly Appropriation Committee. Madam Secretary.
Medina.
Aye.
Medina, aye. Baker. Aye. Baker, aye. Bloom. Aye. Bloom, aye. Chavez. Harper.
Aye.
Harper, aye. Irwin. Aye. Irwin, aye. Jones Sawyer. Aye. Jones Sawyer, aye. Levine. Levine, aye. Linder. Linder, aye. Lowe. Santiago. Weber. Williams.
8-0, your motion passes, your bill passes. We'll keep it open to members to add on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Senator. So we lift the call. Is not here. Can we add on? Can we add on and wait for Mr. Santiago? It's only Mr. Santiago who's missing. It's only Mr. Santiago who's missing, right?
Yeah, I don't think opening the roll on that unless some of our abstentions are going to change their votes.
I'm on Dr. Pan's vote. I'm going to change my vote.
Okay, so you open that one.
Okay, so we'll lift the call. Okay. Lift the call, correct? And that's this one, right?
Yes. So do you want to announce that?
Okay, yeah. We're going to lift the call on item 5, Senate Bill 574.
Let's see. Santiago. And then say. Okay.
Linder, aye.
Linder, aye. 7-4.
So Senate Bill 574, 7-4, the measure passes. And okay. He wants to do add-ons. All right, but we'll go ahead, right?
SB 42, Chavez, Levine, Levine, no, Santiago. 10-1.
AB, Senate Bill 42, 10-1, the measure passes. I'll leave it open for add-ons.
SB 62, Jones Sawyer. Aye. Jones Sawyer, aye. Lowe. Santiago.
SB 62, 11-0, the measure passes. We'll leave it open for add-on.
SB 344, Chavez. Lowe, Santiago, Weber. Weber, I. Williams. Williams, I.
SB 344, 10-0. The measure passes. We'll leave it open for add-ons.
SB 376, Chavez, Lowe, Santiago, Weber. Weber, I.
SB 376, 82. The measure passes. We'll leave it open for add-ons.
SB 605, Baker. Baker, I. Santiago. Oh, sorry. Bloom. Aye. Bloom, I. So it's 11-0.
SB 605, 11-0. The measure passes. We'll leave it open for add-on.
SB 686, Bloom. Aye. Bloom, I. Santiago.
And Baker to no.
Baker not voting to no.
SB 686, 10-2. The measure passes. We'll leave it open for add-on. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jones Sawyer. At the Jones. Jones.